Hello everyone, so I will be doing my September wrap up. This is very late, but you know, better late than never. For the month of September, I read 8 books, so let's get started. The first book I read was My Friend Anna, The True Story of a Fake Heiress by Rachel Deloach Williams. This is a true crime novel about Anna Delvey, who was a young con artist posing as a German heiress. This book was written by one of Anna's victims, a former Vanity Fair photo editor who thought Anna was her friend until she conned her out of $60,000. I gave this a 3-star rating on Goodreads. I did find it very interesting, but there were many parts that I just didn't care about. What happened to Rachel was horrible. I felt a lot of parts were not necessary. As much as it is about Rachel, I just didn't really care for those parts that it talked about her life before she met Anna. Like, she talked about her college life and how she became a photo editor at Vanity Fair, and I'm sorry to say, I just didn't care about those parts. What was most fascinating was Anna. I did end up wanting to know more about Anna after this book. Like, how was she able to pull all this off? So you will have to do your own research after this book if you want to know more about Anna, since this story is strictly about Rachel and what she did to Rachel. I can't imagine going through what she went through, and she even states that a lot of people will think that she's stupid because she willingly lent this woman that much amount of money. But she had no reason to doubt her. She was her friend, and she really believed that this girl was an heiress, and there was no reason to think otherwise because Anna was living in a luxury hotel, and many times Anna would pay for expensive things for Rachel and her to do. So she was very good at pretending that she was an heiress and pretending that, oh, you'll get the money right away. I don't blame Rachel for what she did. I probably would have done the same thing because that's what you do for friends, and she promised she'd get the money right away, and she usually follows through. I don't want to give away a lot of details about what Anna did to Rachel, since it was so interesting watching it all unfold and being like, whoa, at this stuff that she was able to pull off. So I think that was very interesting reading, so I don't want to spoil it. And it was a nice change reading a true crime novel that didn't have to do with murder, because those are usually the most popular true crime novels, are usually about serial killers. And so it was nice reading about someone who didn't get killed. The second book I read was Go Ask Alice by Beatrice Sparks. This is written as a teenager's diary whose life was changed when she was at a party and was slipped LSD into her drink, and after that she became hooked. This is a very famous book. I've heard about it since I was in middle school. It was written in the 70s, and it was marketed as a real 15-year-old's diary. That's why on the cover it says that it was written by an anonymous, but later it came out that it was fabricated and it was written by Beatrice Sparks. When it first came out, it was very controversial since it dealt with a lot of heavy topics, and I can see how it would be in the 70s, but sadly today it isn't that shocking, so I don't think this book ages that well. Since this girl came from a loving home, she was very good at school, she hardly ever got into trouble. So she didn't really have any major problems in her life, yet she still turned to drugs. And it just kind of shocked people that anybody could turn to drugs and how easy drugs are accessible. But in today's time, we already know that. And sadly, a girl ruining her life by drugs isn't that shocking. This book was written to deter people from using drugs. It showed the dangers of drug use. And I don't think they did a very good job doing this. There are a lot of things horrible that happened to this young girl, but they really didn't go into much details about how that affected her. But she kind of just blew it off. The author did go into much detail about how the drugs made her feel. So if anything, it kind of showed how drugs are awesome instead of how badly drugs can ruin your life. And in the story, sadly, this young girl gets raped. And that is a horrible thing to happen, but I think this book handles it all wrong. She kind of just blows it off, and it is never really dealt with. And she never even talks about how that makes her feel. So I get they were trying to be like, oh, drugs are bad because she went to this party looking for drugs and all this, and this is what happened to her. But then you just don't blow it off like it's a big thing. And I really disliked that about this book. And that is why I gave this book like a 2-star rating on Goodreads. The third book I read was Campfire by Sean Sarles. This is a young adult horror novel about Maddie Davenport, who goes on a camping trip with her friends and family. And they all gather around the campfire to tell horror stories, but soon those horror stories come to life. I gave this a 2-star rating on Goodreads, but that is only because this isn't geared towards me. I don't think it is a bad novel per se. I just think I'm a little too old for this book because it was kind of more like a C-list horror movie. You know, it's kind of like a campy horror movie instead of like a really scary horror book. And that's what I wanted to read. So I don't really have anything really negative to say. So I think if you are on the younger side, you probably would enjoy this book, or not a big horror fan, but still want to get into the Halloween season, I think this book would be good for you. It just wasn't for me. The fourth book I read was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a historical fiction novel about a fictional band, the Six. I've never read a book like this before. I thought it would be confusing since it's told through interviews, but once you kind of get a handle on who is who, then it's not confusing at all. And I actually really like how this is written, since all the characters are being interviewed, and if a single event occurs, you get perspectives from every side. And so you kind of really get a feel of what happened during that scene. I really liked the female characters. There is kind of a love triangle, but this love triangle felt real. There was no drama or cattiness. These characters actually understood each other and actually helped each other. And I thought that was beautiful because usually love triangles, they're always fighting over the guy and like being mean to each other, but this felt just real. And you really end up feeling for these characters, and I was left feeling kind of disappointed that this wasn't an actual real band. So I highly recommend this book, and I gave it a 4-star rating on Goodreads. The fifth book I read was Speak by Laurie Anderson. This is a young adult contemporary novel. This is about Melinda, who was starting freshman year as an outcast because at the end of the year summer party, she called the cops, and everyone is mad at her and not talking to her, even her friends. This story is very heartbreaking because you watch her become increasingly isolated, and even her parents give her a hard time with her behavior changes. And it's so sad that she has no one to confide in and has to face what happened to her all alone, which is at the party she was raped, and that is why she called the cops. I think this is a very important story that, like, especially young girls need to read. I think this book handled this topic well, and it is very hard to read because this book felt very real. You really felt for this young woman. The only bad thing I have to say is that I didn't like the ending because I felt the ending was abrupt. You didn't really have a closure, and you didn't really see her being able to recover. And that was very disappointing because I would like to know how she was able to get help and move forward from there. The sixth book I read was Puddin' by Julie Murphy. This is the sequel to Dumplin'. This book focuses on the characters Millie Michalchuk and Callie Reyes, who was introduced in Dumplin'. Millie and Callie are very opposite of each other. Millie isn't very popular, doesn't have a boyfriend, and she goes to fat camp every summer, while Callie is very pretty. She is captain of the dance team and has a popular boyfriend. However, something happens that brings these characters together, and at first Callie pushes Millie away, but they soon grow closer. And I liked this book more than I did Dumplin'. I think it had a better message of self-love and the beauty of female friendship. At first, I couldn't stand the character Callie. She was such a bitch. She was so rude and full of herself, and I just couldn't stand her. And her dance friends got together and trashed a small town's gym, who happens to be Millie's uncle. But, she couldn't understand how this was wrong. Callie was the only one who got caught, and so she was kicked off the dance team. And she thought this was so unreasonable, and that just pissed me off. How could you not know that vandalizing someone's property is wrong, and you're lucky that you only got kicked off the dance team? And what the dance team did was just awful. They stopped talking to Callie, even though they were also involved. Callie didn't rat on them, and so they didn't want to be associated with Callie and her criminal image. So they just completely cut her off. And I just couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand all the drama. It was just too high school, and I've been out of high school for so long. I just really didn't like reading that part. But I was happy with Callie's growth. She became a better person. Millie and her friends took Callie in, and first she was rude to them, of course, because, they weren't popular and they didn't look a certain way. But towards the end, Callie grew as a person, and I really liked that. And Callie helped Millie out too. She gave Millie the confidence to go after her dreams, despite what people might think of her because of her looks. And I think that sent a good message. The seventh book I read was Superman, Dawnbreaker by Matt De La Pena. This is a young adult fantasy novel, and it is the fourth book in the DC Icon series. And this one follows the story of Clark Kent, who at this time is in high school, and something is going bad in his town, Smallville, and so he enlists his friend Lana Lang to help find what's going on. I really enjoy all these books in this series. They're just very lighthearted and, just about superheroes. So if superheroes isn't really your thing, then these books aren't your thing, especially because they're very whimsical and not very deep. However, this book was. This author puts in real issues that you're facing today that what I wasn't expecting. This novel tackled deportation and racism towards Mexican, and that is something huge that is going on in this country, and I was so surprised that it was discussed in this book, and it made me very happy. Since this is a young adult book and dealing with superheroes, I think a lot of young people will read this book, and I am so glad that real issues were discussed and not in a in-your-face kind of way. So you got to really think about it without being forced to, if that makes sense. But I also enjoyed this book because it was very reminiscent of the show Smallville. It was on when I was in high school and I used to watch it, and that was fun kind of remembering it while reading this book. The last book I read was Chalkman by C.J. Tudor. This is a mystery thriller novel about Eddie, who in 1986 was a kid, and he and his friends developed a secret code using chalk stick figures. these were their sort of messages that only they understood. But one day, these chalk stick figures led them to a dismembered body. And now it's in 2006, and Eddie is a grown man, and he receives a letter with just a single chalk man drawing. And all his friends received the same note. And at first, he thought it was just a joke. He blew it off until one of his friends ends up dead. I am a huge mystery thriller novel fan, and this novel did not disappoint. There were many twists, but all of them weren't predictable. I find it very hard to review mystery thriller novels because I don't want to give too much away. So I'm afraid of saying something that gives something away, because the fun of it is reading everything while it unfolds, and I don't want to spoil anything because then the suspense will be ruined. So I don't want to give too much away, because this was one of the better thrillers I read this year. There was only one major problem I had with this novel, and that involves rape. The main character, when he was a kid, he was assaulted by a much older boy. He was forced to have the older boy's penis in his mouth, and what I hate about it is that it was never addressed as rape. It was horribly written. The older boy is only ever referred to as a bully, and I think that is wrong. He was never addressed that he was actually raped, and I just think that whole scene was not necessary. So those are all the books I read in the month of September. Like and subscribe, and I will see y'all later. Bye!